Chapter 10. One night, in the darkness, shortly before dawn, Julia shook me. "Maria," she whispered, "my water broke, and the pains have started." I opened my eyes, suddenly awake. "It's coming? But Donna Elena says it's not quite ready." "But it's happening." Her eyes were wide and her face pale. "Maria, I'm scared." I stood up and helped Julia to her feet. "Can you make it to Donna Elena's?" "Yes," she nodded. We told the harmonica man we were leaving. He said he was not working the next day and would watch Oscar. I wished Alicia was with us. Julia leaned against me as we hurried through the dark streets, stopping at times when Julia had a pain. We slowly worked our way up the stairs to Donna Elena's apartment. I knocked on the door. Finally, it was opened. I bowed my head in respect. "The baby's coming," I said. Donna Elena glanced at Julia's stomach. "Come in and sit down," she said. "I'll change my clothes." She moved swiftly to straighten the blankets on the bed in which she had been sleeping, folded a towel onto a chair, motioned Julia to it, and stepped out of the room. Julia lowered herself into the rocking chair, and I sat on the edge of my bed, body stiff with fear. Julia's skin seemed almost white in the night. She trembled and was praying. Donna Elena came back into the room, wearing a dark print dress and a white apron. She went directly to her dresser, lit a candle in front of a statue of Our Lady, and whispered prayers. Turning to Julia, she said, "Come into the delivery room and I'll check you." She looked at me. "Wait out here for now, Maria, but your sister will probably need you during the delivery." My stomach twisted with fear, but I gazed around the room in wonder as I waited. Only in church had I seen such beauty. On one dresser I saw lace, framed pictures, statues of Our Lady and the saints, and the flickering candle. An old wooden carving like I'd never seen before was placed on another dresser across the room. A little man with a blue hat and blue clothing stood in a stall, holding a staff in one hand and his other hand open toward heaven, his whole body polished with age. Beside him was placed a carved bull, and above him flew a wooden angel with a golden dress and uplifted hands. A tiny lamp glowed next to the small scene, lighting it with importance. I looked at myself in a mirror. I looked tired, and while Julia and Oscar had grown more pale, I was as dark as always. I thought, Julia's the beautiful one. Julia is older. Why me? Why did I have to be the one who Papa thought would save the family? Then I remembered all the suffering Julia had gone through, and I was ashamed. I heard Donna Elena washing in the bathroom. "She's part way along, all right," she said gently, returning to the room where I was waiting. "But I don't like her weakness, and the baby's pretty small. If something goes wrong, we'll have to call an ambulance." "We can't! She'll be sent back!" I began to cry. "My friend's aunt, she was caught when she tried to go to the hospital." Donna Elena shook her head. "That's a possibility, but it doesn't usually happen. Don't cry, Maria. She needs you, and you'll have to be strong. She's frightened. You've got to help her stay calm." The old woman peered into my eyes. "Have you ever seen a birth before?" I shook my head, but I had heard births, heard the sounds of heavy breathing and of struggle. I remembered Mama's delivery of Teresa. Papa was gone for the season, looking for work, and Julia, a married woman, was with Mama and the midwife. It was nice, and the crickets were crying as Oscar and I waited in the shed. Julia had come out to us earlier and whispered to me that it was almost time and I should pray. So I knelt, holding Oscar against me, fingering Mama's beads as I prayed all of the rosary. There were sounds of hard breathing from inside. Then we heard the high, shrill cry of a newborn, the infant Teresa. Now Donna Elena put both hands on my shoulders and spoke with firmness. "Act like things are okay. The baby's face up, which will make it harder. There's a painting of Our Lady on the wall for her to stare at. Try to keep her focused on that." She turned. "Come with me," she said, "and hold Julia's hand." So I entered the birth room. Julia lay on a high bed, a sheet draped over her body. There was a little bed in the corner for a baby, and a suitcase with Donna Elena's supplies. I saw a cross with Jesus hanging above the bed. I looked away from it. It reminded me of Oscar's shadow man. Donna Elena pushed a stool over for me next to Julia, stroked Julia's face, and said softly, "You're doing fine. Repeat some prayers with me." Julia prayed along with Donna Elena, and I bowed my head, but I couldn't pray. Suddenly, Julia stopped praying, jerked her knees up, arched her back, and cried, "Oh, oh, Mama, Papa, Ramon, Ramon." Donna Elena looked at me. "Hold her hand tighter and talk to her." I grabbed Julia's sweaty hand, and she clung to me. "It's okay, Julia. I'm here. I'm taking care of you. You're just having your baby. Don't be afraid. Donna Elena thinks things are just fine." I sputtered out the words. Julia stared at the ceiling until another pain began. She arched her back and cried, "Ramon, don't let them take me. Don't let them hurt me. Come back, come back." I turned to Donna Elena frantically, and she nodded, once at me, her face stern. Turning back to Julia, I pressed my hand against her cheek. "Don't be afraid, Julia," I said. "See Our Lady on the wall? She's caring for you. Pray to her." Julia looked at the painting and moved her lips for a few minutes. Donna Elena stepped up next to her and held a cup of tea to her lips. "Drink a few sips of this, Julia. It'll help, and I'll massage your back and stomach." Donna Elena undraped Julia's stomach and rubbed it. Julia was quieter. Then she began to groan and cry again. I glanced up at the unblinking painting of the Virgin on the wall. "Why?" I said to myself. "Why are you letting Julia suffer?" "Maria, I need you," Julia cried urgently. She flung her arm out toward me, reaching for my hand. I grasped her hand and bent so my head was against her chest. "I'm here, Julia. I won't leave you. We'll take care of each other." To myself I whispered, "Mama, Mama." The time passed, and I sat back on my stool, and Donna Elena sat in her chair at the foot of the bed. We heard a knock at her front door, and she said to me, "Probably someone needs me. Stay with her, and I'll be back in a minute." She took off her apron and left the room. I looked at Julia. Her breathing was shallow. Sweat stood in beads on her face, and she stared at Our Lady and didn't seem to know I was there. I walked to the window away from the bed and looked outside. It was daylight now. The sky was clear, and 2 small trees stood between the building and the street. New leaves outlined the branches of the trees. Julia had another pain, and Donna Elena came back to the room just as it was ending. She dipped a washcloth in a basin of water and wiped it across Julia's forehead. Julia groaned. "Shh." Donna Elena soothed Julia. "You'll be fine. You're safe with me. I'm going to take Maria into the kitchen now and give her some breakfast." She took her white apron off and motioned me to follow her into the next room and sit at her wooden table. Glancing over her shoulder at me while she worked, she heated coffee and took tortillas from the refrigerator. "Birth isn't always this hard," she said. "It's mostly 'cause she's so weak and scared and she has suffered so much." Julia groaned again. Putting her apron back on, Donna Elena said, "Stay here, I'll be back." Julia's cries diminished, and I looked around the room, seeing a scale for weighing babies, jars of herbs on the counter, and drying clumps of plants hanging on strings from the ceiling. The room smelled like Donna Elena had smelled when we first met her, the night we arrived in the crates. She returned to the kitchen. "Your sister's opening slowly. I think it'll be a while." "But she'll live?" My hands shook. "Yes, she'll live," she said with compassion. "I'll pour us some more coffee and we'll drink it in with Julia." She moved a bottle of herbs from the stove to the counter. I glanced from the herbs to the plants hanging from the ceiling, and then followed her back into Julia's room. Julia looked at us, and Donna Elena said gently, "I'm with you, my child." "Me too, Julia," I said. I turned toward Donna Elena, bending my head in respect. "Donna Elena, may I ask you a question?" "Of course." "You're not from Mexico, are you?" "No." "Then where are you from?" "I'm from New Mexico, here in the United States. I'm a citizen." "But if you're from New Mexico, why are you in Chicago? It's so far away." The old woman brushed the palms of her hands against her dress. "I came to be with my son," she sighed. "When the old ones I cared for were gone." She looked down at her hands. "Now my son's gone too. But I've got so many patients, many without papers like you. I just can't leave them and go back." Julia had another pain, and Donna Elena stood next to her bed. When the pain was over, I asked Donna Elena, "Do you miss home?" She sat back down in her chair and pressed her white hair back from her face. "Of course," she answered. "I was raised in the grasses of the Llanos as a sheep herder under the huge sky." She paused, then said, "Did you see my son Isidro?" She left the room and returned with the old carving of the little man with a bull and angel. It was my great-grandmother's. It's very precious, the only thing left from my childhood. "What does he do?" "He blesses the land. When I was a girl, every May we had processions with flowers. We carried our big San Isidro around our fields to give them goodness." "We had processions too," I whispered. She put her hand on mine. "Then you know how beautiful they were," she smiled. "The saint's blue clothes remind me of the sky at home." Pausing, she said, "Here, we're lucky if we even see a sliver of blue, and it's gray and dirty." "I know," I said softly. "At home, before the Guardias, I thought the sky was filled with angels. If so, we'd be safe. Now I never see it, and here, even the rain is cruel." I began to cry again as Julia moaned. Donna Elena set the carving down and motioned me to stand next to Julia with her. More time passed. Julia moaned and arched her body, and Donna Elena massaged her back and stomach. Other people came to Donna Elena's door, spoke softly, and left. Sweat stood out on Julia's body like dew on new stalks of corn. Once, when I moved close to her frightened eyes, she asked urgently, "Ramon? Ramon? Where is he?" I held her hands tightly. "Julia, it's me, Maria. I'm with you. We're here with Donna Elena." Tears ran down Julia's cheeks. She dropped my hands, and she lay back, staring at the ceiling. I sat down on the stool and closed my eyes in pain. "Mama, Papa," I cried. "I want home. I want home." Donna Elena came into the room and pulled her chair close to where I sat on the stool. She reached out and placed her soft, wrinkled hand on mine. "Maria," she said, "you'll learn that the goodness you had before, it can't ever really go away. It's all inside of you, your family, your home, your land, before the killings began. You can keep those things living inside, like my son and family live in me. And the grass and the sky, I feel them every day. They're still part of me, and it'll be that way for you." She sat still with her hand on mine, and again I thought of moss on the high rocks near our home. Julia cried again, and I went back to my place near her head. As Donna Elena checked between her legs and said, "She's opened enough now. It'll be soon. Like I said, the baby's face is up. That's why her labor's been so hard." Julia screamed and thrashed downward with her body. "That's right," Donna Elena said. "It's time to push. Push." Julia shouted and pushed, her face purple with effort. "Push. Push," Donna Elena said, and again began to pray. Then Julia shouted, "Ramon! Ramon!" I looked down at Julia's legs. There was blood, and suddenly a little body slid into Donna Elena's hands. My mouth dropped, and I didn't move. The world was silent, and all I saw was the little form. Then I heard the sound, a high, piercing cry, as if the baby were enraged. "It's here," I said. "It's alive." Julia stared forward. "It's alive," she said. Donna Elena spoke from the bottom of the bed. "It's a girl, a fine girl, just small but active. Thanks be to God." She prayed quietly as she worked. I looked at the baby. It was wet with mucus and blood. Donna Elena was tying string around the cord coming from its belly. Then she cut the cord with scissors and lifted the baby into the air for Julia to see, one hand under the head, one under its bottom, like a priest holding up holy wine. Donna Elena's face beamed, and I saw tears in her old eyes. She wrapped the baby quickly in a blanket and laid it on Julia's chest. Donna Elena smiled, wiped her hands, and stroked Julia's forehead. "You have your child, and she's healthy." Julia was crying, her eyes filled with joy. I cried also, staring at the baby, my mouth still open. The baby's arms and legs jerked, and its eyes clenched shut as it cried. I was alive. Alive. But the baby's skin was dark as mine.